this unreasonable skepticism? Are they victims of misinformation themselves?
We are about to enter sacred time. We are about to make this time and this place sacred by our presence and intention. Please turn off or silence your phones, and as you do so, I invite us also to turn down the volume on our fears, to remove our emotional masks, and to loosen the armor around our hearts. Don't take my word for it. Do it as slowly as you need to. If you take a little risk with these good people, you may find that they have the same human needs as you do. Breathe. Let go of the expectations placed on you by others and those they taught you to place on yourself. Drop the guilt and the shame, not to shirk accountability, but an honest expectation of the possibility of forgiveness. Let go of the thing you said the other day. Let go of the thing you dread next week. Be here in this moment. Breathe here. As is our custom, if you'd like to come and light a candle for whatever personal or private reasons, please do so while we sit in stillness listening to the prelude. Please stand in body or spirit for our chalice lighting and spoken affirmation. Our chalice lighting this morning is by Melanie Davis, entitled A Spark of Hope. If ever there were a time for a candle in the darkness, this would be it. Using a spark of hope, kindle the flame of love, ignite the light of peace, and feed the flame of justice. Please join me as together we remind ourselves of the affirmation that is a cornerstone of our free faith tradition. The words, should you need them, are in the morning program. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another. You may be seated. For our opening thought today, we listen to the words of Erica Hewitt to learn more about being human. Welcome to this morning, this day, and this opportunity to be together in community, which is a time of joy, comfort, and sometimes challenges. This Unitarian Universalist congregation is a place where we come to learn more about being human. We're not here because we figured out life's questions or because we think we've got it right. We come here to learn more about being in a relationship together, how to listen, how to forgive, how to be vulnerable, and how to create trust and compassion in one another. Let us move into worship, willing to be authentic with each other, honest within ourselves, and opening to connection in all its forms. Our first song this morning is Love Makes a Bridge.
Love makes a bridge from heart to heart and hand to hand. Love finds a way when laws are blind and freedom banned. Love breaks the walls of language, gender, class, and age. Love gives us wings to slip the bars of every cage. Love lifts the hopes that force and fear have beaten down. Love breaks the chains and gives us strength to stand our ground. Love rings the bells of wanted birth and wedding day. Love guides the hands that promise more than words can say. Love makes a bridge that winds may shake, yet not destroy. Love carries faith through life and death to endless joy.
Thoreau K. Farrar provides the words for our morning practices. Change is a word on wheels. If we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. Mahatma Gandhi. Every Sunday morning, the church choir and I spend time in reflection and silence before we begin the first worship service. I often offer my thoughts on the day's theme or the state of the world, providing context to the message we bring. On a recent Sunday, I said to the choir, "So often we make the mistake of living according to our hopes instead of according to our realities." I didn't mean to say it, and I didn't know that I would, but as I did, this statement became immediately true. I wonder if, in our efforts to be the change we want to see in the world, we stop short at our ideal selves, the idea of ourselves we are most comfortable with. I wonder how often I think I've already been the change, and I'm waiting idly for the tendencies of the world to catch up. I'm unsettled by how frequently I'm surprised by my own social idiocy. How many times need I screw up the same person's pronouns or note that I am not surprised that the person who just nearly ran me off the road is of a certain race and or age, or make immediate assumptions about someone because of what I perceive to be their class? Or maybe this is a better question. How many times do I need to make mistakes at the expense of other people or people's groups before I'm ready to admit that I'm not any better at this than the bigoted and willfully ignorant? I am liberal, often painfully so. I am not enlightened, I am not elevated, I am not better. But I believe with everything I am that I can be. Change is a word on wheels. It's not a destination, but a journey. If I am to be change, I must commit to humility and refuse to settle for my own comforting achievements. Our prayer for today. That which is in us and all around us, and which constantly draws us to our holiest selves, remove from me any spirit of complacency that would aim to prevent me from seeing the truth of myself. Strengthen me as I commit to a lifestyle of development, and remind me that that lifestyle is simply called love. Amen. Please join me in a time of silence, which will be followed by a musical response. Michael Davis will be talking to us today in our free pulpit about emotional intelligence, principles for improving relationships, families, and faith. You may read his bio in the morning program. Following his discourse, we will have an open dialogue. Remember to wait for someone to bring a microphone to you, which they will hold before you speak. This way, everyone, especially those watching on Zoom, can easily hear and not a lot of hands are touching the microphone. Since Michael has not been with us before, we have a bookmark gift as a small appreciation of the visit.
Well, I'm extremely gratified to be here today. Something that I wanted to say at the very top is my former colleague, Dan Altoff, a member of the congregation who invited me here today, he told me by email that I could expect that he wouldn't be here to greet me because he's off enjoying Florida, but I could expect to be very warmly greeted. And he was exactly right when he said so. With so many members of the congregation here coming to welcome me, and just this is also a very welcoming space. I can tell just by being present here and being asked to pause and reflect in a way that I have not been asked in a while, as well as just the symbolism of multiple different faith traditions being represented in this room. This is a model of inclusivity. And as your guest, I thank you for it. So I'm going to just start by kind of giving an idea of who I am and why I'm talking about emotional intelligence. I come from Southeastern Oklahoma State University, where I've worked for more than a decade, and I am an alum of the institution. And I don't think that Southeastern is any stranger to the Red River Unitarian Universalist Church, well represented, I think, among former speakers and members of the congregation and visitors. And there, I work in the Department of Behavioral Sciences, specifically as an assistant professor of criminal justice. And my focus of research has been behaviors, morals, ethics of individuals who work in the criminal justice system. So, in our curriculum, of course, we teach students about law and policy, we teach about constitutional rights, and we teach about police procedure and the corrections and litigation fields. But overlaid across all of that across the criminal justice enterprise are questions of human behavior and interventions for criminal deviancy, whether those interventions work and what it is that makes those interventions work or fail. And a lot of people enter the profession with noble intentions and then fail to reach their stated goals, right? And then some succeed. And so the question that I've focused on in my research is, are there hallmarks or are there behavioral mannerisms, behavioral traits that tend a person towards success or tend a person towards failure, using failure without judgment, right? My talk today will be in four parts. First, I'm going to talk about the definition of emotional intelligence and kind of how I arrived at as an area of research. Second, I'll talk a little bit about our neurobiology and why we might have some trouble navigating our own emotions and the extent to which they conflict with reason and logic. I'm going to talk about how emotional intelligence has been shown through research to improve our lives. And then finally, I will speak briefly about how to improve our own emotional intelligence so as to improve our lives. So we know, of course, that there's significant room within the profession of kind of what I specialize in criminal justice, to focus on this. What are the primary differentiating factors between a person who wishes to make a difference and fails and a person who wishes to make a difference and succeeds? Society, individuals within society, depending on their own individual biases, might come up with a number of conclusions here. They might say, well, a person isn't ethical enough. That's why they fail. They might say a person isn't pious enough or faithful enough, and that's why they fail. They might say they're not learned enough. They can't see the forest for trees. They can't keep their head out of the clouds. They don't understand people, or they don't understand society. Or the grenade in the gumbo, so to say, why even try and affect change? Entropy is here to destroy us all anyway. So my question assumes some good intention, right? I want to make a difference and I might fail, or I want to make a difference and I might succeed. And if we're looking for these things that nudge us in one direction or another, yes, there are many possible things to look at. And yes, ethics are among them. And yes, an understanding of individuals and society are among them. But if we are looking for the most sweeping factors, if we are looking for potentially some of the most universal factors, there are elements and theories from my profession that can inform us. I teach criminal justice. it is likely not lost on anyone present today that the question of law enforcement mistakes or ethics or misconduct is ripe for our consideration. That the nationally famous cases, of course, include the murder of George Floyd in Chicago, the criminal convictions of police officers in the homicide of other Black men and women in recent years, including Michael Slager in South Carolina in the killing of Walter Scott, and here in Texas, the murder of Botham Jean by Dallas police officer Amber Geiger, who entered a guilty plea. These cases are highlighted in the media and by myself here in this talk, not necessarily because they are illustrative of most law enforcement, but because they do represent a cross-section of misconduct worthy of our acknowledgement and of our attempts at repair, and of course have a nexus with race and are illustrative of regulatory and training failures. So if we start in my profession with the question of what differentiates between good cop and bad cop, how do we expand that to the rest of society that wishes to make a difference in the world and perform public service? Well, we are informed by emotional intelligence. John Mayer of the University of New Hampshire and Peter Salovey of Yale University, who is now Yale's president, interestingly, developed the theory of emotional intelligence as a tool for understanding why there are many individuals who may score mediocre on intelligence tests or rational or cognitive intelligence, and yet still seem to rise to the top of their agencies and their institutions and outperform those with high IQ on a multitude of measurable scales. Things that seem rather fundamental to a flourishing and satisfying life, as well as to a healthy and functioning society. This cohort of human beings, despite having maybe mediocre intelligence quotient, outperform Mensa members and high IQ individuals on metrics of personal happiness, the quantity and quality of their friendships, and the quality of their romantic relationships, their own satisfaction with their labor, and others' satisfaction with their labor, including in the workplace, a sense of fulfillment and peace, their spouse, with their children, and with their faith, reported to be more prominent among individuals with emotional intelligence. Additionally, they seem to produce more efficient labor with fewer infractions and with generally a greater smile on their face. They seem to have the elasticity of personality and mindset to bounce back from a negative interaction, say with a customer in a customer service experience, and more able to move on to the next task after that negative interaction with less emotional baggage or stress from the latent influence of that negative interaction. So you can probably imagine why this might be of particular importance to police, but not just there, but individuals across society. This cohort seems to have a greater ability to be successful in negotiations. They make, for example, better realtors, better lawyers, more effectively counsel patients if they are doctors, being able to make that emotional connection. They have a greater capacity to de-escalate conflict and to make more ethical decisions or hold themselves to higher ethical standards, a greater ability to make sales, a greater ability to maintain their own physical and mental health, and a greater capacity to achieve promotion and leadership roles. So what are the factors of emotional intelligence? If we were to put a definition on it, what is it? Well, it contains 4 pieces. The first is the ability to perceive emotions, okay? Emotional intelligence is all about understanding your own emotions, understanding the emotion of others, and it all starts with being able to perceive what emotion is being expressed at what time, however subtly. Also to identify their contours, their triggers, their verbal manifestation, their nonverbal manifestation. Perception can be a blunt instrument or a finely tuned one. For example, you might imagine that frustration and anger look similar in a person's expressions despite them being quite different phenomena. Someone with a high level of emotional perceptivity can even see emotion in a person sometimes before that person has identified it themselves. Some of you might have experienced this among people who know you really well. Second part is reasoning with emotions. This is the ability to negotiate one's own emotions through prioritization or even suppression with mental effort. This is where we find ways to reduce an urge to cry or to be angry, where those things would inconvenience us, or where we utilize stimuli to exacerbate certain emotions intentionally, either in ourselves or others. For example, if we want someone to feel shame that they acted badly, or we want them to feel happy because they scored a touchdown, what kind of things do we do to pursue those triggers in others? This is also done to ourselves when we listen to angry music to churn up a competitive spirit before playing sports, or when we intentionally play easy listening music in a place of solitude and reflection. The third part out of the four parts, understanding emotions. Emotions carry weight in our interactions. They show, whether we like it or not, at least to those most attuned to them. Understanding allows the ability to discriminate between the origins of emotional expression. So, for example, the emotionally unintelligent person thinks their boss is terse and angry and yelling at them because of their own bad performance as an employee. I must have done something wrong. But the emotionally intelligent person certainly leaves the door open to other possible rationale for why the boss is angry. That they may have had a bad interaction with their family that morning, that their car may have broken down on the way to work. And so the emotionally intelligent person keeps the idea pathways open to other possibilities. One who understands emotion knows not just the possible range of their origin, but also how one emotion can merge into another. For example, how empathy turned too high can turn into pity, or how grief and sadness that go too long can turn into nihilism or despair. Finally, the most important aspect of emotional intelligence is the management of emotions, responding appropriately, but also paving your own pathway toward instigating or not instigating the emotions of others. In my world, researching policing, this might manifest as de escalation or as civic diplomacy. But for many of us, it simply manifests as trying to change someone else's attitude to make our own life better. We engender feelings of warmth and gratitude with a supervisor or with a family member if we want better assignments for work or chores. We will ourselves to be and therefore act panicked or sad in order to make a loved one depend upon us and give us attention. Sometimes half of this is done subconsciously. We make someone laugh before we know they're going to see the mess that we made. Or we make someone feel shame if we think that might be to our utility in a negotiation and we think they're being overzealous. So, my point here in this talk is I'm just a messenger for a theory that has been developed by researchers, Mayer and Salovey, this definition of emotional intelligence. But I also want to remind us that it is grounded in intuition and logic that comes to us way before 1991 when the concept of emotional intelligence was first published. Of course, the door is open to being both an emotionally intelligent person and a rationally intelligent person at the same time. And this has been identified over and over again in history, in philosophy, and in traditions of faith. It was Dostoevsky who said, it takes something more than intelligence to act intelligently. Right? He may not have filled in all the blanks about emotional intelligence, but it may have been where he was getting. The more modern author, Dean Koontz, who even today is underrated, in my humble opinion, said, some people think only intellect counts, how to solve problems, knowing how to get by, knowing how to identify an advantage and then seize it. But the functions of intellect are insufficient without courage and love and friendship and compassion and empathy. And he goes on to say, this is why we are attracted to literature with those traits. That we seek to acknowledge and to admire not just cognitive skills in life. We crave friends who are human with the full spectrum and full vibrancy of the expressive experience, who are not merely smart or not merely interesting, but have some flair and zest for life, who feel something and will us to feel those feelings with them, who laugh at themselves when they foul up, who are sarcastic when it is called for, and who are sincere when it is called for. with the right timing. It should be no secret that some individuals are more fluid and natural with their emotional depth and range. It is not surprising that some people bring out our own outpouring of emotional complexity than others, and we often appreciate them for it, whether we realize it or not. So, what types of information from philosophy and faith traditions could Mayer and Salovey have been grounding their theory in? Consider this quote: anybody can become angry, that is easy. But to be angry with the right person and to the right degree and at the right time and for the right purpose and in the right way, that might not at all be easy. That's Aristotle speaking 2,400 years ago. Also, from the Bible, the book of Proverbs is a veritable font of emotional intelligence witticisms. From Proverbs 29, a fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man holds it quietly back. Or from Proverbs 16, whoever is slow to anger is better than the Almighty, and he who rules his spirit is more impressive than he who takes a city. Proverbs chapter 11, whoever belittles his neighbor lacks sense, but a man of understanding remains silent. Proverbs chapter 14, tranquil heart gives life to flesh, but envy makes the bones rot. And then finally, from Proverbs 16, gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the body. Each of which, in its own way, is expressing that some level of felicity with emotional intelligence might be valuable to us for our own inner peace and for the quality of our social interaction. That being smart with logic alone is unsatisfactory for all but the most cognitive functions of life. Not every challenge we face is one of deductive reasoning or of mathematical calculation. In fact, few of the challenges that we face in the social environment are such. Instead, we must frequently deal with, negotiate with, and yes, share a democracy with human beings that we might generously describe as sometimes irrational. So, how do we develop the skill of traveling through life in America without alienating our neighbors out of rage at their idiosyncrasies or their conspiracies? How do we engage in a romantic life without encountering the speed bumps that look like the romance-killing poison of politics and religion? Well, the answer, of course, is a combination of factors, but it has to include aspiring to self-regulation, tamping down whatever need for catharsis drives us to have outbursts of anger or frustration, engaging in empathy and not some thespian version of it for show, but actual connectedness to someone's pain and confusion without falling headlong into despair ourselves as a result. It's about slowing down our interactions to wonder, what can be done to keep this interaction from devolving further into chaos or antipathy? And then actively pursuing a curative option once it becomes like that. A joke, ceasing the interaction, a diversion, a warm gesture. Can we see why someone with such talents and such insight might be able to build tighter and more satisfying relationships in their life? Stronger families, a greater bond with their children and their neighbors and their colleagues. Can we see that the capacity to forestall dissent or to notice the earliest signs of resentment or jealousy and then formulate a neutralizing response on the fly could be helpful to us in all types of social endeavor? Surely we can. So what is the problem here? This kind of leads me to the second portion of what I'm talking about. Well, brains developed with completely separate areas for cognition, rational thinking, and emotional processing. Our brains are not just one organ, but really the assimilation of multiple organs that happen to be in the same spot, right? All up here. Our emotions are complex. They are the result of a neurological process. But they come from separate formations, partly from our memories, partly from anxiety and fear mechanisms in a organ called the amygdala, and then from our conscious thought in the cerebral cortex. What does this mean? We process emotion in the context of our memories? We do. And that kind of gives this unique little insight. No external stimulus to our lives is understood in the mind without the distortionary lens of our past experience and our innate anxiety and fear. So, based on this, is it surprising to you that a loud noise, which might be merely startling to you, may trigger a full-blown PTSD panic attack in another person because they have a different experiential history? Now imagine it's not just a loud noise, but someone yelling at you because they're frustrated with you. And might the emotional response be different because of the distortionary lens of our prior experience? The amygdala is the emotional center of the brain. It is exclusively nested in emotion, not rational thought. And it's completely separate from the neocortex and cerebral cortex, which gives us an idea that it might sometimes be in conflict with the other parts of the brain since it is a separate component. And it is truly an amazing organ because research has been done about what happens if it's damaged or removed, right? Well, it causes a symptom called affective blindness, also known as emotional blunting. Individuals with damaged or removed amygdalae have been shown to lose passion and zest for any kind of social life, being unable to cry, and in some, even unable to produce tears. Absent of any tendency towards rage or fear or joy, they lose any interest in social activities of competition or cooperation. Additionally, even a normally functioning amygdala has difficulty juggling between multiple conflicting emotions because one tends to take over its passions fully, which makes it challenging for all of us to swiftly transition from one emotion to another without carrying the weight of the previous one to blunt the effect of the new one. This is why when you are angry or you are sad, you find jokes unfunny. Your emotion is still stunted by the prior existence of one. And here's another little facet that makes this complicated for us. The visual and auditory input from our eyes and our ears, for some strange reason, I didn't design it this way, don't blame me, is routed first to the amygdala instead of the cerebral cortex, which means that we first experience all visual and auditory signals in the context of emotion before we do logical reasoning. This leads to a phenomenon called an emotional hijacking. The emotional portion of the brain has faster access to information and stimulus input than the thinking part of the brain. You get out of your car and your cousin says boo from a dark corner of the garage. You will react more as an animal than you will as a thinking, considering, deliberating human being. So this very split second in time where one signal is sent to the amygdala and another signal is sent to the cerebral cortex does allow for the whole rest of the experience to be painted in the context of a certain emotion that is triggered initially. Now, context may be fear, context may be apprehension, lust, anger, or some other emotion, but it will now color the entire context of your response, which means the context is not fully rational, and your response is not fully rational. You will not be fully logical. You will possibly say things that poison your future or present relationships. You will possibly act erratically and look foolish. None of this intentionally. It is the process of an emotional hijack. And it is less likely the more we understand our emotions and learn to control them. So what is the mediating influence between the emotion part of the brain, thinking part of the brain? Memory. Up here in the front of the brain is the prefrontal cortex and the left prefrontal lobe specifically. And this is the part of the brain that develops last and during childhood. And it can be poisoned by emotional trauma as a child and become underdeveloped. And therefore, people have less of a emotional lens to see their emotions through that tamps them down, which is why victims of childhood abuse or neglect may allow their emotions to run rampant for the rest of their lives because of poor development up here. For those that are privileged enough to have a well-adjusted childhood and a very well-developed prefrontal cortex, that left prefrontal lobe, they're going to be able to tamp down their emotions because of their memories, showing them that when my cousin scares me coming from the dark corner of the garage, I don't need to have a fight or flight response to fear because I have not experienced bad fear in my life. But if I had, I will interpret it differently. What has research shown us about emotional intelligence? And then, lastly, how do we grow our own? From the world of employment, and I'm just going to recite some interesting stuff from studies, right? A study of account officers employed by a debt collection agency showed that the account officers with higher emotional intelligence achieved a greater amount of cash collections than those who were not of high emotional intelligence. A study of business managers and executives and other high-level employees showed greater work satisfaction, career productivity, peer satisfaction with the interactions with these people, and tendencies toward cooperation in the workplace. A study of various Catholic parishes showed that those parishes managed by priests with higher emotional intelligence had greater measures of parishioner satisfaction and other organizational outcomes such as improved service attendance and improved number and size of donations. A study of entrepreneurs in Italy showed that among high emotional intelligence entrepreneurs that managed small firms, they had higher cash flow and higher performance. So that's just generally performing better at work or whatever you seek to do in life. What about cross-cultural understanding? Individuals with higher emotional intelligence tend to adjust to new countries better after moving to them, either as exchange students or for work. They also develop faster and tighter bonds with their coworkers despite there being a cultural or even language barrier or different cultural backgrounds. Why? Partly because the effect of emotional intelligence is to reduce apprehension in interactions with those who are different from ourselves, and thereby making the intercultural dialogue less anxiety-inducing. A similar discovery was found in 2019 between parents and their children, especially when there is a larger than normal age gap between them. Parents with higher emotional intelligence had achieved greater cross-cultural understanding with their kids. They were less judgmental of their different interests, more embracing of their different taste in music and fashion, and far, far less likely to have a discordant relationship with them. What about negotiation and dispute resolution? Well, the application of emotional intelligence in dispute resolution settings operates as a distinct advantage for the individual with higher emotional intelligence, more capable of achieving what their stated goals or outcomes in the negotiation were. Why? Because they're able to notice the other person's emotions maybe before they notice them. They're able to manipulate those emotions through the using of certain triggers. The traditional assumption about disputation, think about like a courtroom, is that a nondescript poker face approach and cold, rational calculation is what's necessary to achieve maximal concessions by the other side. Emotional intelligence research has flipped this on its head. That sometimes making a person feel empathy for yourself might be advantageous to yourself. Making a person feel shame in themselves might be advantageous to yourself. What about health outcomes? Well, we do have an extensive body of knowledge accumulated over the past 30 years. Individuals with higher emotional intelligence have been found to have a negative correlation with the consumption of alcohol and a positive correlation with subjective feelings of life satisfaction, the size and quality of an individual's social network, the number and frequency of doctor consultations, and overall health status. There's a study being done right now about overall longevity and longer life. We'll see what the results are in the next few years. Particularly in the service profession involving shift work and frequent interaction with other people, there is a phenomenon that creates a lot of stress where you have to feign an emotion that you do not truly hold at the moment and hide or mask an emotion that you do truly hold at the moment. That is the nature of customer service. Individuals with high emotional intelligence also have what is called higher emotional plasticity. They experience less stress from having to feign an emotion that they do not truly possess. They're also more aware of their own coping mechanisms and more likely to use their own coping mechanisms. And then lastly, in terms of research on emotional intelligence, what about interpersonal relationships? Well, one study showed that when individuals with high emotional intelligence were the subject of a survey sent to their friends, the friends reported that the higher emotional intelligence of their friends, they were ranked higher with charisma, thoughtfulness, kindness, and empathic listening. In other words, your friends find you to be a better friend the more emotional intelligence you have. This was studied in terms of possible attraction to the opposite sex in a study in Germany where individuals with whom the subjects had interacted of the opposite sex were then asked to rank those individuals on what kind of good or bad impression they made. And higher emotional intelligence individuals made a much stronger good impression. In couples, the higher the emotional intelligence quotient of one party to the relationship, the higher the relationship satisfaction of the other party, and vice versa. So, how do I improve my emotional intelligence here in the last couple of minutes of this talk? Number one, quite literally, study a list of emotions. If you so much as Google it, you're going to find lists of 1,000 different varieties. Determine for yourself if you know the telltale differences between similar emotions, lust versus love, fervor versus fanaticism, skepticism versus distrust, persistence versus willpower versus stubbornness. All of these may look similar to each other, but yet might be very distinct. Practice imagining scenarios for these in your daily life. Also, as a general rule, you cannot become more emotionally intelligent without a lot of social interaction. You have to place yourself in social settings more often and participate in conversation and interaction with different people in different settings. Just peaceful and contemplative settings like this church, but busy settings, stressful settings, places where you can experience the full range of emotional variety and be a student of it. Second word of advice out of 4. It helps to attune yourself to your own habits. Do you seek praise after accomplishing something that brings you pride? If so, is it likely that others may want to seek praise after accomplishing something that brings them pride? What can we learn from Dale Carnegie and how to win friends and influence people, right? Another example is the engendering of feelings of credibility or gravitas among individuals whom you know. This can be done passively. Classic example is when Teddy Roosevelt, early in his career, was appointed commissioner of police in New York City, way before he was president. He couldn't individually meet all of the people who worked for him as police officers in New York City. So what did he do? How do I send a message to everyone who works for me that they can find me credible? Go out into the streets and do the same job they are for half a day every day instead of sitting behind a desk barking orders. What can you do that develops or engenders even a passive connection with individuals who you want to build trust with? Number 3, preventative maintenance. In your evaluation of yourself, what traits violate the golden rule? Are you stubborn, grumpy, or easily upset in ways that you would not appreciate if someone else expressed them in the same way? How do you begin to nudge yourself in a different direction with these expressions? Emotionally intelligent people are often folks who understand that negative emotions can be cured through the more diligent performance of this kind of preventative maintenance. Being quick to apologize, for example, can short circuit patterns that make us dig in our heels and make family members frustrated, but it has to be sincere. It is not crass or minimizing to think of our relationships as bank accounts with deposits and withdrawals, because in a sense, we do this all the time. You must invest in those you care about. If you want them to respect you, to dote on you, to calm you when you are upset, then you have to sincerely pursue the emotive responsibilities that they are seeking from you. And those duties and responsibilities that they seek from you may be very different than the ones you seek from them. And finally, a note about faith. Why might an emotionally intelligent person have a more worldly, informed, and grounded relationship with their faith tradition? Well, consider the sort of inherent emotional stoicism in this famous phrase. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. If that's not some form of emotional stoicism, I'm not sure what is. When we can become comfortable with not knowing, not predicting, not stressing over not knowing and predicting, then we find something closer to an inner peace. This is why emotional regulation is a theme throughout the world's oldest religions, in Buddhism and in Jainism as a key to enlightenment, and also in Christian Protestant ideas as well. And it's illustrated in the explicit rationale offered for a number of moral teachings. Whether the sin is gluttony or envy or sloth or greed, Scripture does not simply say, well, you express these things, you offend a deity. It also says that we harm ourselves. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. Greed hurts ourselves, not just an offense to God. Or like I mentioned earlier, Proverbs 14, a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. So I appreciate the opportunity that you gave me to speak with you today. Clearly excited about the subject matter and happy to take a couple of questions. Please wait for the microphone.
We all saw the tape of Derek Chauvin killing um, George Floyd, and I think the most frightening thing about it to me was not the act itself, although that was horrible, but the fact that several other police officers stood around watching this murder occur and did nothing to stop it. In fact, seemed to be protecting Derek Chauvin from the onlookers who might have wanted to intervene. Is there some sort of training that could be given to officers to prevent that kind of response? I know that there's a tendency to back up your buddy, but is there a way that they could have been trained, that they would have been prepared to give a different response?
Yeah, there's a lot there. So I'll just answer it this way. First of all, what you mentioned about the tendency to back up your buddy is a phenomenon that we study called the blue wall of silence. And it's not just unique to policing. In many professions, the instinct to cover for your friend who faces similar challenges as you do in the workplace is sometimes strong, even if the covering may itself be unethical. Second part I'll say is police, as individuals who do have to encounter quite a number of unsundry characters through the course of any given day, especially in certain jurisdictions, have either intentionally or unintentionally sometimes trained themselves against empathy or trained themselves to ignore whatever instincts exist within themselves to feel empathy. And this happens in part because they are lied to a lot, right? Or lied to about experiential symptoms. You're hurting me. The cuffs are too tight. Very often not true, although sometimes absolutely true. And in general, curative effects in terms of training have been minimal. And this is why a lot of individuals have turned toward more hard and fast solutions, such as when an individual expresses a medical condition, there is no question you must have them checked out by a medical professional. And yes, will that increase the number of false reports and bringing people to the hospital for nothing? Yes, it will. But at the end of the day, perhaps it is the only cure, at least for now. Any other questions?
Well, Marion's question of what all you talked about was fascinating. I loved it because I come from a family that has my son had a head injury when he was 16, and it was a pretty bad head injury. And his neurologist said he's going to have problems for the rest of his life. So life went on. He graduated from college and all that. Well, then these decisions he makes, you know, like to go out and ride a bicycle for 91 miles in the heat. You know, so what you were talking about that connection there totally makes so much sense. And then I think my father also had a head injury when he was an older man, and his fuse was just super short. You know, my mother would say, "Did you take the trash?" And he would just blow up, and then he would start laughing about it. So that makes that was really good. All the whole talk was wonderful. But my question is like what Marion was saying: how are our police forces being trained? Or is there consultants that go in, or do they have like a certain amount of schooling that go to like a realtor does? You know, for the subject you're talking about?
The answer is yes and no. It depends on the jurisdiction and whether they have made this type of training a priority. There are vanishingly few jurisdictions that actually screen for emotional intelligence in, say, for example, the hiring process, which is something that I potentially would advocate for, sort of as an evangelist, if you will, for emotional intelligence. But when it comes to certain things in an emotional intelligence toolkit, like, for example, skills for the de-escalation of conflict and against the unnecessary escalation of conflict. Those things have been trained on, especially in some of the bigger cities, and I'll use Dallas as a prime example. You can look this up, and at the beginning of this decade, in 2011, 2012, and 2013, there was a big push to do de-escalation training with City of Dallas law enforcement officers, thousands and thousands of officers. And then it was not just trained in terms of existing officers through continuing course credits, it was also taught at Police Academy and in a much more intensive way. And it turns out that we've learned that individuals who graduated from the Dallas Police Academy in those years that it was given a significant focus, statistically have far fewer incidents of officer-involved shootings. Now, you do still have some, obviously, but far fewer instances of officer-involved shootings than do their peer officers across the force. Also, younger officers, just in general, across the United States, have far fewer officer-involved shootings than do their older peers or counterparts. And part of this is due to training, part of it's due to socialization and a greater acceptance of awareness of the way that we must control anger and those types of things. But yes, some jurisdictions are training on it, particularly de-escalation tactics, others are not. All right, well, I appreciate the welcomeness, and I appreciate the questions, and I'll stick around afterward. All right, thank you.
The purpose of the church is to encourage all who gather there to grow more generous in spirit and in action. This is the great end of all the world's faith traditions, to bring the human being closer to the divine by acts of creation and compassion. We now take an offering that allows us to exercise that all important generosity of spirit, an offering that will support this self supporting church and its many ministries. The gifts of the congregation will be most gratefully received. The bowl awaits. Our last song this morning is The Emotional Intelligence Song by Christopher Stone.
There's a new kind of intelligence needed so that history stops getting repeated.
There's something we all need for our lives to make sense. It's called emotional intelligence. You might hear it called EI or EQ. What it means is emotional literacy for me and for you. Emotional intelligence develops the mind and helps us make sense of our feelings inside. What a wonderful world it's going to be with more and more emotional literacy. Now peace has been sung about in many a song. Everybody wants that we all get along. Yet finding a roadmap to get us all there is going to take more than I hope and I care. Emotional intelligence develops the mind and helps us make sense of our feelings inside. What a wonderful world it's going to be with more and more emotional literacy.
There's a new kind of intelligence needed so that history stops getting repeated.
Managing feelings is what it's about, without stuffing them down or acting them out. Emotional intelligence develops the mind and helps us make sense of our feelings inside. What a wonderful world it's going to be with more and more emotional literacy. Emotions can do a lot of harm or create more harmony. We can drown in our unchecked feelings, or we can learn a better way to be. Emotional intelligence develops the mind and helps us make sense of our feelings inside. What a wonderful world it's going to be with more and more emotional literacy. Emotional intelligence develops the mind and helps us make sense of our feelings inside. What a wonderful world it's going to be with more and more emotional literacy. We can build world harmony.
The song was a bop, huh? I want to invite you to stand in body or spirit for benediction and remain standing for extinguishing the chalice. Be true, be well, be loving is our benediction this morning. Cynthia Landrum. We leave this gathered community, but we don't leave our connection, our concerns, our care for each other. Our service to each other, to the world, and to our faith continues. Until we are together again, friends, be strong, be well, be true, and be loving. Please join me in saying the words to extinguish our chalice. The words are in the morning program. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you for joining us this morning. Worship is completed. Now let our service begin.